Cadet Jessica Harper felt her stomach drop as the transport shuttle's doors hissed open. The gleaming metal floors of Unity Prime stretched out before her like a mirror, reflecting the faces of dozens of alien cadets who turned to stare at the newcomer. The orbital station was massive beyond anything she had ever imagined, with corridors that seemed to go on forever and ceilings so high they disappeared into soft blue lighting. She clutched her single duffel bag tighter and stepped onto the deck. Her worn military boots made loud clicking sounds against the perfect floor, while everyone else seemed to glide silently. The other cadets looked like they belonged here. Their uniforms were perfectly pressed, their equipment gleamed, and they moved with the confidence of beings who had never doubted their place in the galaxy. Commander Vale stood waiting near the orientation desk. The Altrian officer was easily 7 feet tall, with deep blue skin that seemed to shimmer under the station lights. Her 4 arms moved gracefully as she sorted through data tablets, and when she looked up at Jessica, her large silver eyes showed no warmth whatsoever. "Ah, yes, the human," Commander Vale said, her voice carrying easily across the busy docking bay. Several nearby cadets stopped their conversations to listen. Jessica Harper, correct? From the planet Earth. Jessica nodded, trying to stand straighter. "Yes, ma'am." Commander Vale picked up a thick tablet and began reading from it in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Human. Classification. Sentient bipedal mammal. Planet of origin. Earth. Designated as Class 12 Deathworld." She paused and looked directly at Jessica. "That means your homeworld is considered one of the most dangerous planets in known space." A few alien cadets made chittering sounds that might have been laughter. Jessica felt her cheeks burn red. She had known Earth was considered dangerous by galactic standards, but hearing it announced like this made her feel like some kind of dangerous animal on display. Professor Kane approached from across the bay. The crystalline being looked like a walking sculpture made of clear purple glass, with light pulsing through his body in complex patterns. When he spoke, his voice sounded like wind chimes. "Fascinating. We have never had a Deathworlder in our program before. This should prove educational." "Cadet Harper will be assigned to Tactical Unit 7, Commander Vale announced. "Report to Training Bay 12 in 1 hour for squad integration." As Jessica made her way through the corridors, she could not help but notice how different everything was from the military bases back on Earth. There were no harsh fluorescent lights or concrete walls. Instead, everything glowed with soft, natural light, and the walls seemed to be made of some kind of living material that shifted colors gently. Gardens grew right out of the floor in some areas, filled with plants she had never seen before. The other cadets she passed were just as alien as the station itself. Some floated instead of walking, while others seemed to be made of pure energy. A group of tall, graceful beings with silver skin and too many joints in their arms were discussing something in musical tones. They all looked so peaceful, so civilized. Jessica found Training Bay 12 and stepped inside to meet her new squad. The room was huge, with holographic displays showing tactical scenarios from around the galaxy. Her 3 squad mates were already waiting, and they looked about as enthusiastic as she felt. Jorg was from a world called Pelios, and he looked almost human except for his green-tinted skin and the fact that he had no nose, just 2 small slits where a nose should be. His world, he explained, was covered in gardens and had not seen warfare for over 3,000 years. Syra was even stranger. She came from the floating cities of Nimbus, and her body seemed to be made of swirling gas held together by some kind of energy field. She could change her shape slightly and spoke in a voice that sounded like whispers carried on wind. Then there was Flux, who was not really a being at all, but rather a collection of bright energy that had somehow developed consciousness. Flux communicated through colored lights that appeared in the air, which the room's computers translated into words. Their first training simulation was a disaster. The exercise was designed to test peaceful conflict resolution, something that came naturally to beings from worlds where violence was rare or unknown. Jessica watched as her squad mates effortlessly navigated complex diplomatic scenarios, using techniques and approaches that seemed completely foreign to her. When it was her turn, Jessica found herself facing a holographic alien diplomat who was angry about trade negotiations. Her instinct was to be direct and firm, the way humans handled disagreements. But every approach she tried seemed to make the situation worse. The diplomat became more agitated, and eventually the simulation ended with complete diplomatic failure. Perhaps, Jorek said quietly as they left the training bay, humans are not quite ready for advanced tactical training. Syra's gaseous form flickered with what might have been embarrassment. I am sure she will improve with time, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Flux's lights pulsed in patterns that translated as polite but distant encouragement. As they walked through the corridors toward the dining hall, Jessica heard Jorek whisper to Syra, "Great, we got stuck with the primitive." The words hit harder than any physical blow could have. Jessica had trained her whole life for this opportunity, had scored higher on the entrance exams than thousands of other human candidates, and had given up everything to come here. But to her squad mates, she was just a primitive creature from a dangerous world who did not belong among civilized beings. That night, lying in her small quarters and staring out at the stars through the viewport, Jessica wondered if coming to Unity Prime had been a terrible mistake. 3 weeks had passed since Jessica Harper first set foot on Unity Prime, and things had not gotten much better. Every morning brought new training exercises that seemed designed to highlight just how different she was from her squad mates. While Jorek, Syra, and Flux excelled at diplomatic simulations and peaceful conflict resolution, Jessica struggled with concepts that seemed to come naturally to beings from civilized worlds. The morning started like any other, with Jessica sitting in the back of the advanced tactics classroom, trying to understand a lecture about nonviolent intervention strategies. Professor Kane's crystalline body pulsed with soft purple light as he explained complex theories that made perfect sense to everyone except her. She was taking notes when the alarm system suddenly came to life. Red lights flashed throughout the station, and a loud wailing sound echoed through corridors. Jessica had never heard this particular alarm before, but something about it made her skin crawl. It was not the usual drill signal or the minor emergency tone they had heard during system maintenance. This was something else entirely. All cadets report to main briefing hall immediately, came the announcement over the station's communication system. The voice belonged to Commander Vale, and even through the metallic speakers, Jessica could hear the tension. The briefing hall was packed with hundreds of cadets from all the different training units. Jessica and her squad found seats near the back. As usual, the advanced unit sat in the front rows, their perfect uniforms and confident postures making them look like they belonged on recruitment posters. Commander Vale stood at the front of the hall, her 4 blue arms working frantically over a holographic display. Behind her, a massive screen showed star charts and data streams that Jessica did not recognize. The room fell silent as the commander began to speak. At 0800 hours this morning, we received a distress beacon from the research vessel Scientific Endeavor, she announced. The ship was conducting routine surveys near the edge of Wraith Sector when contact was lost. The holographic display changed to show the last known position of the missing ship. Jessica had heard of Wraith Sector before, though only in whispers among the human military personnel back on Earth. It was a region of space where ships sometimes disappeared without explanation. Senior Cadet Brian Miller stood up from the front row. He was from one of the most advanced units in the academy, tall and confident with the kind of bearing that made instructors nod approvingly. "Commander, do we have any information about what might have happened to them?" Commander Vale's blue skin seemed to darken slightly. Intelligence analysis suggests possible Kythera involvement. The reaction in the hall was immediate. Gasps and frightened whispers filled the air. Even the most advanced cadets looked shaken by this news. Jessica leaned forward, not understanding why everyone seemed so terrified. For those unfamiliar with this species, Commander Vale continued, the Kythera are apex predators in the Outer Rim. They are considered the most dangerous hunting species in known space. In over 2,000 years of galactic record-keeping, there has never been a single documented case of Kythera retreat or surrender. The holographic display shifted to show what looked like security footage from various encounters. Jessica watched as massive black creatures, easily twice the size of humans, moved through destroyed starships with terrifying efficiency. Their movements were fluid and deadly, and even to the grainy footage, she could see rows of sharp teeth and claws that could tear through metal. They hunt sentient species for sport, Commander Vale explained grimly. 17 different civilizations have been completely wiped out by Kythera packs. They show no mercy, take no prisoners, and never stop hunting once they have chosen their prey. Professor Kane stepped forward, his crystalline form chiming softly. This will serve as an advanced training exercise for our senior units. We will be running rescue simulations to prepare our cadets for real emergency situations. Jessica watched as the advanced squads began volunteering for the exercise. These were the best cadets in the academy, beings who had mastered every aspect of peaceful diplomacy and advanced tactical thinking. They looked eager to prove themselves in this challenging scenario. Then, to everyone's surprise, Jorik raised his hand from their section near the back. Tactical Unit 7 volunteers for the exercise, he said loudly. The hall fell silent. Jessica could feel hundreds of eyes turning toward their small group. Commander Vale's expression was one of barely concealed disbelief. Cadet Jorik, she said carefully, this is advanced tactical training. Your unit has been struggling with basic diplomatic protocols. Perhaps you should focus on foundational skills before attempting such complex scenarios. Professor Kane's lights pulsed, and what Jessica had learned was his way of showing concern. The Kythera scenarios require sophisticated understanding of predator psychology and advanced evasion techniques. Your unit lacks the necessary experience. But as the holographic display continued showing footage on the attack site, Jessica found herself studying the images more carefully than anyone else in the room. While her squad mates and instructors debated whether they were ready for the challenge, she noticed things that did not seem quite right. The debris field from the scientific endeavor was not scattered randomly like she would expect from a normal attack. Instead, the pieces seemed to be arranged in specific patterns. There were clear areas between the wreckage that formed almost geometric shapes, and the way the larger chunks of metal were positioned reminded her of something she had seen before. They are still there, she said quietly, not really meaning to speak out loud. But in the hushed atmosphere of the briefing hall, her words carried further than she intended. Commander Vale stopped mid-sentence and turned to look at her. What did you say, Cadet Harper? Jessica felt her face burning as hundreds of alien faces turned toward her. I said they are still there, waiting. The silence in the room was deafening. Commander Vale's arms crossed in front of her chest, and her silver eyes narrowed. How could you possibly know that? Jessica stared at the holographic images, trying to put her instincts into words that would make sense to beings from peaceful worlds. The patterns in the debris, the way the wreckage was positioned, the clear spaces between the chunks of metal, it all reminded her of something from Earth's nature documentaries. It looks like a hunting blind, she said finally, like when predators arrange their environment to ambush prey. The debris is not random. It is positioned to create hiding spots and clear lines of sight. The room erupted in whispers and confused chatter. Jessica could hear fragments of conversations in dozens of different languages, but the tone was universal. Skepticism mixed with curiosity. Commander Vale studied the display more carefully, her expression thoughtful. That is an interesting observation, Cadet Harper, but these are theoretical projections based on sensor data. There is no way to know with certainty what the actual conditions are like. The training exercise had started normally enough. Jessica and her squad reported to Simulation Base 7, where holographic projectors were supposed to create a realistic recreation of the scientific endeavor disaster site. The instructors had spent 20 minutes explaining the safety protocols and reminding everyone that nothing they would encounter was real. Remember, Professor Kane had said, his crystalline form pulsing with calm blue light, these are advanced holographic constructs. They cannot actually harm you, but they will respond to your actions as if they were real Kythera. Jessica had nodded along with the others, though something felt wrong from the very beginning. The air in the simulation bay seemed too thick, too heavy. There was a smell she could not identify, something wild and dangerous that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Then the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a few seconds later, bathing everything in harsh red light. But by then, the screaming had already started. Containment breach in xenobiology labs. Came the announcement over the station's communication system. The voice was different now, high-pitched and panicked. This is not a drill. All cadets evacuate to designated safe zones immediately. Jessica felt her blood turn to ice as she realized what had happened. The Academy did not just study alien species through holographic records. They kept actual specimens in high-security laboratories for research purposes. And something had gone wrong with the containment systems. The first Kythera appeared at the far end of the simulation bay, phasing to the solid metal wall, like it was made of water. Jessica had seen images of these creatures during the briefings, but nothing had prepared her for seeing one in person. It stood nearly 8 feet tall, its body covered in midnight black armor that seemed to absorb the emergency lighting. 6 limbs moved with fluid grace, each one ending in curved claws that looked like they could slice through starship hull plating. But it was the creature's head that truly terrified her. Multiple rows of diamond-hard teeth, fill a jaw that could easily crush a human skull. 6 red eyes scanned the room with predatory intelligence. And when it opened its mouth, the sound that came out was like nothing Jessica had ever heard before. The hunting scream echoed through the station's corridors, a sound that seemed designed to freeze prey in place with pure terror. It was answered by similar calls from other directions, and Jessica realized with growing horror that there was not just one Kythera loose on the station. "Move," she whispered to her squad mates, but none of them seemed capable of responding. George stood frozen against the wall, his normally green skin now a sickly pale yellow. His large eyes were wide with terror, and Jessica could see him shaking uncontrollably. Beings from his peaceful garden world had never evolved to deal with apex predators. Their entire civilization was built on harmony and cooperation. Syra's gaseous form was flickering wildly, her usual controlled shape dissolving into chaotic swirls of panic. The energy that held her consciousness together was being disrupted by pure fear. She kept trying to speak, but only managed frightened whispers that the station's translators could barely pick up. Flux was perhaps in the worst state of all. The energy being's usual bright patterns had turned dark and erratic, pulsing with colors Jessica had never seen before. The lights that normally translated his thoughts into words were now just random flashes of terror. 17 species, Jessica whispered, remembering the briefings. They have hunted 17 sentient species to extinction. The Kythera at the far end of the bay had noticed them now. Its 6 red eyes locked onto their small group and began moving in their direction with terrifying purpose. Each step was perfectly silent despite the creature's massive size, and Jessica watched in horror as it occasionally phased partially through debris without slowing down. "The maintenance corridor," she hissed at her squad mates. "We need to get to the maintenance corridor." But her friends were beyond rational thought. Evolution had not prepared them for this. Their species had developed on worlds where the biggest threat might be harsh weather or resource scarcity, not creatures that hunted sentient beings for sport. Jessica grabbed George by the arm and physically dragged him toward the emergency exit. His skin felt cold and clammy, and he was making small whimpering sounds that broke her heart. She had never seen anyone so completely overwhelmed by fear. "Syra, Flux, come on," she called back to the others, but they seemed rooted in place. The Kythera was getting closer now, and Jessica could see more details that made her stomach churn. Scars covered its black carapace, each one probably a trophy from some previous hunt. Its claws scraped against the metal floor with each step, leaving deep gouges in the reinforced alloy. More hunting screams echoed from other parts of the station, and Jessica realized that multiple Kythera were loose and actively hunting. She could hear the sounds of panic in the distance, alien voices crying out in languages she did not recognize, the crash of equipment being overturned, the hum of weapons that would probably be useless against creatures that could phase through solid matter. With strength born of desperation, Jessica managed to pull all 3 of her squad mates toward the maintenance corridor. It was a narrow space filled with pipes and electrical conduits, barely wide enough for them to squeeze through. But it was also the only exit that did not require them to cross the main bay where the Kythera was hunting. They huddled together in the cramped space, listening to sounds of chaos echoing through the station. Emergency announcements continued to blare from the communication system, but the voices were becoming more panicked and less coordinated. "Security teams to level 7. We have multiple containment breaches. Medical emergency in Section 12. We need trauma units immediately. All civilian personnel evacuate to emergency shelters." Jessica pressed herself against the cold metal wall of the maintenance corridor and tried to think. Her squad mates were in no condition to help with any kind of plan. Jorg was still shaking uncontrollably. Syra's form kept flickering in and out of coherence, and Flux's energy patterns showed nothing but pure terror. Through the thin walls of the corridor, she could hear the Kythera moving around the simulation bay. It was searching methodically, and Jessica knew it was only a matter of time before it found their hiding spot. These creatures had evolved to hunt, and they would not give up easily. The hunting screams continued to echo through Unity Prime, each one a reminder that nowhere on the station was truly safe. Jessica closed her eyes and tried to control her breathing, knowing that panic would only get them all killed. But deep down, some part of her mind was beginning to stir. Something that had nothing to do with her academy training or her peaceful diplomatic education. Something much older and far more dangerous. The maintenance corridor had become their tomb. Jessica could hear the largest Kythera getting closer, its claws scraping against metal as it searched through the simulation bay. The sound was methodical, patient. This creature had all the time in the world to find them, and they had nowhere left to run. Jorg was pressed against the far wall, his pale yellow skin now almost white with terror. His breathing came in short, panicked gasps that were getting louder despite his efforts to stay quiet. Syra's gaseous form had compressed into a tight ball of flickering energy, while Flux's lights had dimmed to almost nothing. They were all waiting to die. Then Jessica heard something that made her blood freeze. The soft whisper of matter displacement. The Kythera was phasing through the corridor wall. First came the massive head, those 6 red eyes scanning the narrow space with predatory intelligence. The creature's jaw hung open slightly, revealing rows of teeth that could bite through starship armor. Then came the shoulders, covered in that midnight black carapace that seemed to absorb all light. Jessica's squad mates pressed themselves against the walls, trying to become invisible, but there was nowhere to hide in the cramped corridor. The Kythera's eyes found them immediately, and its hunting scream filled the enclosed space with sound that felt like physical pain. Something happened to Jessica in that moment, something that had nothing to do with her 3 weeks of diplomatic training or her academy education. Deep in her brain, in places that evolution had carved out over millions of years, ancient programming suddenly activated. Her breathing changed first. Instead of the quick, panicked gasps of her squad mates, her breathing became slow and deep. Her pupils dilated, letting in more light, while her muscles began to tense in ways she had never experienced before. This was not the controlled tension of academy physical training. This was something far older and more primal. The fear that had been crushing her chest suddenly evaporated. In its place came something else entirely. Recognition. She knew this feeling, not from personal experience, but from genetic memory that stretched back through countless generations of human ancestors. This was what her great-great-grandmother had felt when she faced down a charging bear in the Canadian wilderness. This was what her grandfather had experienced during the war, when enemy soldiers broke through his unit's defensive line. This was what every human had carried inside them since the species first stood upright on the African savanna and decided to hunt creatures 10 times their size. Jessica stood up. The movement was fluid and controlled, nothing like the jerky panic of prey trying to escape. She did not scramble or cower or beg. She simply rose to her full height and began walking forward, directly toward the massive predator that was phasing through the wall. The Kythera Alpha froze mid-emergence, its 6 red eyes widening with something that might have been confusion. In 2,000 years of hunting across the galaxy, nothing had ever approached them willingly. Prey ran. Prey hid. Prey screamed and begged for mercy before being torn apart. But this small creature was walking toward it with steady, measured steps. Jessica's head tilted slightly to one side, unconsciously mirroring the hunting posture that the Kythera itself was using. Her eyes never left the creature's face, maintaining the kind of direct eye contact that prey animals never dared attempt. Deep in her throat, she made a sound that she had never made before, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from some primitive part of her brain. The effect on the Kythera was immediate and unprecedented. The massive predator stopped phasing to the wall entirely, its body becoming fully solid as every muscle tensed. Its hunting scream cut off abruptly, replaced by a silence that was somehow even more frightening. For the first time in its species' evolutionary history, a Kithra was experiencing something completely foreign, the absolute certainty that it was no longer the apex predator in the room. Every instinct that had been honed over millions of years of evolution was suddenly screaming warnings. This small bipedal creature was not prey. This was something else entirely. Jessica continued walking forward, her movements becoming more fluid with each step. She was not thinking consciously about what she was doing. Her modern human brain, the part that had learned diplomacy and peaceful conflict resolution, had temporarily stepped aside. In its place was something much older, the accumulated wisdom of every human ancestor who had ever faced down a predator and won. The Kithira took a step backward. The movement was small, barely noticeable, but in the confined space of the maintenance corridor it might as well have been a full retreat. Behind Jessica, she could hear Jorik make a small sound of amazement. Syra's gaseous form stopped flickering, while Flux's energy patterns began to show something other than pure terror. Jessica's lips pulled back slightly, not quite a smile, but something that showed her teeth. Human teeth, designed by evolution not just for eating plants or tearing meat, but for intimidation, for showing other predators that humans were not easy prey. The Kithira's 6 eyes were now focused entirely on Jessica's face, studying this impossible creature that moved like a predator but looked like prey. Its massive head tilted further. Try to understand what it was seeing. The hunting instincts that had served its species so well for millennia were providing no guidance for the situation. Jessica made the growling sound again, louder this time, and took another step forward. The Kithira responded by taking another step back, its claws scraping against the metal floor. The sound was different now. Not the confident scraping of a hunter marking its territory, but the uncertain retreat of a predator that had encountered something beyond its understanding. In the cramped maintenance corridor of Unity Prime, surrounded by the sounds of chaos and panic echoing through the station, something extraordinary was happening. A creature that had terrorized 17 different species, that had never retreated from any encounter in recorded galactic history, was backing away from a human cadet who weighed less than one of its limbs. Jessica Harper was no longer the weakest member of Tactical Unit 7. She was not the primitive from the dangerous world who could not understand advanced diplomatic theory. In this moment, she had become something that the peaceful galaxy had forgotten could exist. She had become what her ancestors had always been, the apex predator of Earth. What happened next would be talked about in xenobiology classrooms for generations to come. The massive Kithira Alpha, this creature that had terrorized entire star systems, slowly began to lower its enormous head. The movement was unmistakable, even to someone who had never studied alien behavior. This was submission. Jessica stood perfectly still, her breathing deep and controlled, as the 8-foot-tall predator bowed before her. The creature's 6 red eyes remained fixed on her face, but the aggressive hunting posture had completely disappeared. Instead of the rigid stance of a killer, the Kithira now held itself in a way that Jessica's instincts recognized as respectful, almost apologetic. The hunting screams that had been echoing through the station suddenly changed. Instead of the terrifying calls that had frozen entire corridors full of cadets in pure terror, the sounds became softer, almost musical. The station's translation computers, which had been programmed to interpret thousands of alien languages, began displaying text that made Jessica's squad mates gasp in amazement. Appeasement calls detected appeared on emergency displays throughout the corridor. Patterns suggest submission behavior. But the real shock came when other Kithira began phasing to the walls around them. Jessica counted 6 more of the massive creatures, each one materializing from different directions until the maintenance corridor was surrounded. For a moment, Jessica felt her newfound confidence waver. 7 apex predators, each one capable of wiping out entire civilizations, all focusing their attention on her small group. Then she realized that every single one of them was displaying the same submissive posture as their leader. 7 of the galaxy's most feared predators, all bowing their heads to one human cadet from Earth. Behind Jessica, Jorik was making small whimpering sounds that might have been prayers in his native language. Syra's gaseous form had stopped flickering entirely, frozen in what might have been shock, while Flux's energy patterns showed colors that the translation computers could not interpret. The Alpha Kythera made a series of soft chirping sounds, completely different from its earlier hunting screams. The station's computers worked frantically to translate the complex sounds, and after a few moments, words began appearing on emergency displays in halting standard galactic. "We withdraw," the translation read. "Did not know Apex Spawn claimed this territory." Jessica felt a chill run down her spine. Apex Spawn. They were calling her the offspring of an apex predator. But that was impossible. Humans were not apex predators in galactic terms. They were just another species from a dangerous world, nothing more. The Alpha continued speaking, its voice becoming clearer as the translation computers adapted to its speech patterns. "Young Deathbringer shows mercy to foolish hunters. We apologize for trespass." Deathbringer. Jessica's mind reeled at the term. These creatures, who had wiped out 17 different species without ever showing mercy or retreating, were calling her a Deathbringer. They saw something in her, recognized something that she had never even known existed. The Alpha Kythera took several more steps backward, its massive form beginning to shimmer as it prepared to phase back through the wall. The other members of the pack were already beginning to disappear, their solid forms becoming translucent as they activated whatever ability allowed them to move through matter. "We hunt elsewhere," the Alpha said, its translated words appearing on the displays one final time. "Tell the Apex Spawn that the Shadow Pack remembers this mercy." And then they were gone. 7 of the most dangerous predators in known space simply vanished, phasing through the station's hull and disappearing into the void of space. The emergency lights continued to flash red, but the hunting screams had stopped entirely. The silence that followed was almost more unsettling than the sounds of terror had been. Jessica sank back against the corridor wall, her legs suddenly feeling weak as the adrenaline began to fade. Her breathing was still deep and controlled, but she could feel her heart pounding in her chest. What had just happened? How had she made creatures that had never retreated in recorded history simply pack up and leave? "Jessica," Jorg whispered, his voice barely audible. "What did you do?" She looked at her squad mates, all of whom were staring at her with expressions of awe and confusion. How could she explain something that she did not understand herself? How could she tell them about the feeling that had risen from somewhere deep in her genetic memory, the certainty that she was facing another predator and needed to establish dominance? "I don't know," she said honestly. I wasn't afraid anymore." The next few hours passed in a blur of medical examinations, security debriefings, and incident reports. The Academy's emergency response teams worked frantically to assess the damage and account for all personnel. Remarkably, despite the presence of 7 loose Kythera on the station, there had been no casualties. A few injuries from panicked evacuations, but no one had actually been harmed by the predators. 3 days later, Jessica found herself sitting in the faculty conference room, facing a panel of the Academy's most senior instructors. Commander Vale sat at the head of the table, her 4 blue arms folded as she reviewed data tablets. Professor Kane stood nearby, his crystalline form pulsing with thoughtful purple light. "Cadet Harper," Commander Vale began, her voice much more respectful than it had been during Jessica's first day. "We need to discuss what happened in the maintenance corridor." Jessica nodded, though she still was not sure what she could tell them that would make any sense. Professor Kane stepped forward, his chiming voice filling the room. "We have been studying the sensor recordings from the incident," he said. "The data shows something that we previously thought was impossible. 7 Kythera, creatures that have never retreated from any encounter in over 2,000 years of recorded history, voluntarily withdrew from a confrontation. But that's not the most remarkable part," Commander Vale added, her silver eyes focusing on Jessica. "According to our behavioral analysis, they submitted to you. They recognize you as a superior predator." Jessica felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "I'm not a predator, ma'am. I'm just a cadet from Earth." "That's where you're wrong," Professor Kane said, his lights pulsing with what Jessica had learned with excitement. "We have been thinking about this all wrong. Humans are not just another species from a death world. You are from the death world, the only planet in known space that produced a species capable of making apex predators submit through presence alone." Commander Vale was updating something on her data tablet as she spoke. Earth did not just have dangerous animals that humans had to avoid, she explained. Earth had dangerous animals that humans hunted and killed. Your species did not survive by hiding or running away. They survived by becoming the most successful predator your planet had ever seen. The words hit Jessica like a physical blow. She thought about Earth's history, about the stories she had grown up hearing. Humans hunting mammoth with nothing but spears.